Good evening. My name is Roberto Gonzales, and I'm a professor of education here at the Harvard Graduate School of Education. I'm very excited to welcome you to the second Askwith Forum this week, of our Super Askwith Week. So before I introduce you to our topic and to our speakers, I'd like to say a few words about Askwith Forums for those who've not been able to attend previously. So the Askwith Forums are free public forums that bring together leaders in our field to campus to share knowledge and engage with our community. They help strengthen the intellectual life of the school through conversations, debate, and the exchange of ideas. Askwith Forums are also a way to open our doors and welcome members of the greater Harvard community and the general public. So, in preview of coming attractions, we hope to see you on Thursday night at 4:30 here for our final Askwith Forum of the week. This forum will begin with a film screening titled "Teach Us All," followed by a panel conversations with members of the Little Rock Nine, who desegregated Central High School in Little Rock, Arkansas. So an event not to be missed. This Askwith Forum is also the kickoff event to a series that we're calling the DACA Seminar. This Askwith Forum, in conjunction with Define American, is really helping us to kick off a seminar, a 15 event series across campus that we're dedicated to issues of immigration and immigration policy. So, as many of you know, on September 5th, 2017, U.S. Attorney General Jeff Sessions announced the termination of the Deferred Action for Childhood Arrivals program, otherwise known as DACA. The administrative action of the Obama administration aimed to protect undocumented immigrants from deportation. In the 5 years of the program, nearly 800,000 young people have benefited from its work authorization and related access, like driver's licenses, through corresponding state legislation. So the termination of this program has reopened debates in this country around the place of these young people in America. It's also sparked efforts on the part of lawmakers, educators, institutional agents, and immigrant communities to advocate on the part of these young people and their families and to address a growing set of needs. So in the wake of that announcement, and as the Trump administration winds down this program, set to end in 1 month, to be clear, on March 5th, many questions have surfaced. Is there a quick congressional fix for this particular population? What is the future of U.S. immigration policy? And how do we as a country define membership? And moreover, how do and will communities respond? The DACA seminar at Harvard is an effort in service to opening up a space of learning and dialogue to our campus and the larger community around the very questions related to the termination of DACA, also TPS, deportations, the current state of immigration policy, and its implication for young people, families, communities, scholars, artists, workers, policymakers, and practitioners. We see this critical wind-down period of DACA and the attention it is receiving from the American public as a window through which to discuss not only DACA, but also a host of immigration-related issues that impact a wide range of the American public. So to that end, I'd like to acknowledge our sponsors for the DACA seminar, the Harvard Graduate School of Education, the Harvard Inequality in America Initiative, Harvard University Faculty of Arts and Sciences, the Committee on Ethnicity, Migration, and Rights, the Charles Warren Center for Studies in American History, Harvard College Act on a Dream, and Define American. I'd also like to thank my fellow co-organizers, Professors Walter Johnson and Kirsten Weld, and give a special thanks to Robin McDowell, who has done a lot of the heavy logistical lifting. We really appreciate you, Robin. So now back to the programming for this evening. 26 years ago, I met a young boy named Alex. He was 6 years old. I was working in Chicago as a youth worker. This was shortly after college in the early 1990s. I had moved into a community, largely immigrant community, on the near northwest side of the city, a community that was largely Mexican, also Polish, and a fair share of Polish families. I stayed in this community. I lived and worked in this community for 10 years. 2 years after I took a job as a director of youth programs 4 blocks down the street. But literally, I lived and worked in this community for the better part of 10 years. And living in this community gave me a worm's eye view of the ways in which larger processes, immigration, schooling, gentrification, policing, the ways in which these processes were framing people's everyday lives, their everyday worlds. It's in this context that I started to get to know young people, many of our neighborhood youth. For many of these youth, they'd grown up alongside of their American-born peers and friends. They had done everything in lockstep with their peers. They had grown up to a daily Pledge of Allegiance. They had gone to prom together. They had fights in the schoolyard. They had dated. They had socialized. They had done everything their American friends were doing, right? But at a critical time in their lives, as their friends were moving forward, taking after-school jobs, getting driver's licenses, thinking about college, getting financial aid for college, they were stuck. So this, for me, began a very long, now 26-year inquiry into this broad question of what happens to undocumented children as they make critical transitions through adolescence and young adulthood. Along the way, I've learned a lot about these young people, a lot about their families, and a lot about these communities, right? And the central to where we are right now as a country, right? These young people, and we've been paying attention to the shutdown a couple of weeks ago, right? People in this country, Americans of all stripes, know who these young people are. But we're also engaging in a deeper conversation, right? This central question of who are we, right? Who is this country for, right? And where do we draw this circle of membership, right? So with us tonight, and let me introduce our very special guest today, who will engage in an interview-style conversation around these issues that I've discussed so far. First, to my far left, Joy Reid. Joy is a political analyst for MSNBC and the host of AM Joy, which airs Saturdays and Sundays from 10 a.m. to noon Eastern Time. She's also the author of the book Barack Obama, The Clintons and the Racial Divide. She's co-editor of We Are the Change We Seek, The Speeches of Barack Obama, and a columnist at the Daily Beast. Joy Reid was formerly the managing editor of thegrio.com, a daily online news source and opinion platform dedicated to delivering stories and perspectives that reflect and affect African American audiences. Joy graduated from Harvard University in 1991 with a concentration in film and is a 2003 Knight Center for Specialized Journalism Fellow. My friend, Jose Antonio Vargas, is a Pulitzer Prize-winning journalist, Emmy-nominated filmmaker, and a leading voice for human rights of immigration. For many of us, Jose played a pivotal and central role in the public discussion of immigration and what it means to be an American when in June 2011 he penned a groundbreaking essay in the New York Times Magazine about his life in the United States as an undocumented immigrant. A year later, he, along with other undocumented young people, was featured on the cover story of Time Magazine. Jose is the founder and CEO of Define American, a nation's leading nonprofit media and cultural organization that fights injustice and anti-immigrant hate through the power of storytelling. His forthcoming memoir, Dear America, Notes of an Undocumented Citizen, will be published by HarperCollins in the fall of 2008. So please join me in giving a huge warm welcome to our speakers. Joy and Jose.
Okay, let's make sure this up. But we be like the president, and clap for ourselves. No shade, no shade. So thank you all for being here. It's nice to be back at Harvard. I don't get out here this much, so it's good to be back on campus, especially here with my friend Jose, my good friend. We're gonna now let you in on our little normally text back and forth conversations, but we're going to do one in front of you. So thank you all for being here. But I want to, because I am in the news biz, I have to start with some news of the day. And I'm going to attempt to play a soundbite. Hopefully this mic will work and you guys will be able to hear it. Today, Donald Trump, the President of the United States, held a meeting, or a sort of a public meeting, one of those meetings where he sort of demonstrates to the country that he's hard at work, talking about the upcoming deadline to renew DACA and to fund the government. And he made some comments saying that 3 times that he would like to see a shutdown if Democrats won't make a deal on ending ending what he calls chain migration, which is otherwise known as immigration, family immigration. And then his chief of staff, John Kelly, was asked his thoughts by reporters, and this is what he said on camera.
Hear from General John Kelly. I want you to listen, and then we're going to talk about it on the other side.
There are 690,000 official DACA registrants, and the president sent over what amounts to be 2.5 times that number, to 1.8 million. The difference between 690 and 1.8 million were the people that some would say were too afraid to sign up, others would say were too lazy to get off their asses, but they didn't sign up. So the president, shockingly, said, okay, 1.8 million, and then probably the biggest shock was in a path to citizenship. That's beyond what anyone could have imagined.
Okay, so, and I'm sorry, I was rude. I forgot to thank Roberto. Thank you very much. And the Askwith forums, and to remind you guys, you can tweet at #Askwith. Sorry about my rudeness, but your
I was sleeping.
Thoughts.
I was okay. Before I answer that, let me just say a couple of things. One, time is the most precious thing we can ever give each other. So thank you so much for being here. But I really want to thank my dear friend Joy, who to me is one of the most essential journalists working today in any medium. Roberto reached out, texted Joy, knows she's incredibly busy, and said, Joy, we're having this event, we're helping kick it off, can we get you here? Not one hesitation, yes, and she's here. I should also note that after President Trump announced the end of DACA in September, Joy, in one of our many text messaging changes that should really be some sort of a play,
It should be.
Said, why don't we do an entire hour of AM Joy dedicated to DACA, featuring undocumented Black, undocumented Asian recipients, so that we're expanding the conversation. So I'm proud to say, as a journalist who happens to be undocumented, that MSNBC, through Joy's show, was the first and the only show on television, cable or broadcast, that did an entire hour on DACA. So I just really want to acknowledge that.
Thank you. And we couldn't have done it without Define American.
Define
it was
American
a partnership.
Help.
Yeah, it was a true partnership.
Joy, so now this is the text conversation.
Yeah.
I think everybody here understands that we are living through, I would think, an unprecedented moment, right? Unprecedented because we don't have a shared news economy. There's no shared news ecosystem. So the chief of staff can speak like that because the way Fox and Friends and Drudge and Breitbart and Fox News will play that is that these ungrateful people who are too lazy to apply versus what people, for example, journalists on MSNBC would contextualize what's happening. So these two ecosystems don't even meet and talk, right? They're not interested in actually bridging divides and sharing information. They're interested in having an agenda and making a political play. I don't, it's tough because as someone who, I did not qualify for the first DACA because I was 3 months older than the age cutoff. I would qualify in any of these proposals right now. I would be one of the 1.8 million people who, by the way, was not lazy to apply or was not too afraid to apply, although I can tell you that there are many, many undocumented people, particularly undocumented Asian people that I've met who have not applied for DACA even though they qualified for it because they were afraid. And not only afraid, but shame. The deep shame in the family. So what's going to happen, Joy? Are they basically going to shut the government down in the next 2 days?
I mean, it appears that the deal breaker for the administration is that they want the American people to pay for the wall. No more Mexico paying for the wall. They want the American people to pay for the wall, billions of dollars for that. They want to end family migration, meaning that immigrants could no longer bring family members unless it was their children or their parent. Even that would be limited. And they want to end the diversity visa lottery that brings about 15,000 African immigrants to this country every year. So they want to essentially reset the clock on immigration back to about 1924, when there was a bill passed, the Johnson-Reid Act.
Emergency legislation passed.
Emergency
It was an
legislation.
emergency legislation.
Yeah.
The first time we had a quota system that basically said no more Greeks, no more Polish. Right? That's the moment that we're at right now.
That's right.
I have to say, Joy, since we have a few minutes, let's back up a little bit. Can you talk to me, because Joy knows this in the few years that we've been, friends and sharing the church that is journalism, is just the lack of context that people have, our own colleagues in journalism have about this issue.
Correct.
That they don't think immigration to them is a political partisan thing. It's not an actual family thing. And so I want to start with asking you, can you talk about your immigrant background?
Sure.
And your story, yes.
Oh, see, this is a great journalist here. He just reversed the whole interview on me. Very briefly, my father came to this country through the same program that brought Barack Obama's dad to this country in the early 1960s. This was the John F. Kennedy program where they went to these countries in Africa that were just getting independence. They wanted their technocrats to come here, go to American universities, and then go back and run their countries. And because there was no sense of geography, they all wound up in places like Idaho and Oregon and Hawaii, because it was just wherever it was economical, because the country was paying full ride. So my father ended up in Iowa, integrating the entire state, apparently. There were lots of Africans. If you go through the old yearbooks of a lot of the colleges in Iowa in the 60s, there are tons of Africans there because the schools there were very economical. So they just sent people there. So he got an engineering degree there. He met my mother there, who I'm not sure what she was doing in Iowa, but she was also an immigrant who had gone from Guyana to Britain, to Great Britain, and was teaching, and then came over on a steamship. Got her name all mangled, but ended up in Iowa also studying. And then they went to New York, where my mom went to NYU to graduate school. And then I was born in New York. My sister was born in Iowa. I was born in New York, and then we moved to Denver. But we're an entirely immigrant family. I'm a first-generation American and have an extended family. I didn't grow up with my father. He ended up going back. They divorced, and I grew up with this Guyanese family, basically an immigrant family in America, where my friends were eating basically Southern food. I was eating roti and curry and pepper pot and all that stuff, and basically living a West Indian culture in the United States. So I know, as well as you do, that this hybrid culture of being an American. I am an American, born here. Interestingly enough, my birth certificate, they mangled the name on it. They put, my mother and father were disagreeing over what to call me, so they put her choice, not his. So my birth certificate is actually different from my name. So if I ever had to produce the birth certificate, I wouldn't be able to do whatever it is Donald Trump thinks you should be limited in doing based on your birth certificate. So so that's my story. But now I'm going to reverse it back on you. Tell me your story, because one of the things that you and I both know gets contextualized incorrectly is that immigration and Mexican Americans are fused in the minds of many of the American public, and DACA and Mexican Americans. You, sir, are not Mexican American.
No, not yes.
So tell me your story, your history.
I will do that. One caveat. There are 34 million Mexicans in this country today. 34 million. If you actually looked at it from a contextual perspective, Mexicans in the 21st century is what Germans are.
Yes.
In the 19th century, in terms of just the actual sheer number. I actually think the news media and everybody in this country owe the Mexican people an apology. I'm saying that because I don't think I've shared this with Joy before. I remember my first trip in Alabama, in Birmingham. I was at the airport, and this woman runs after me. She was kind of crying, and she said, "I am so happy you're not Mexican." I was like, "What?" She's a lawyer who's Mexican,
Right.
who got assigned to be in Birmingham, Alabama. She grew up in Chicago, and she said that when my article came out, my coming out article came out, people circulated it, emailed it to her. She was so afraid to open it because the name was Jose Antonio Vargas. She's like, "Oh God, yeah, another Mexican, whatever." And then she saw my face. She was like, "Oh my God, he's totally Asian." And so she was so happy that a non-Mexican person was now sharing the space. I was so stunned by this because I was like, why is she? I'm from California. I mean, we marry Mexican. It's like, I have 3 cousins married to Mexicans. So I was like, what is she talking about? And then that was my introduction to just how illegal and Mexican have just gotten so merged, right? Bill Moyers said this incredible thing to me earlier this year. We did an event earlier this year, and he said, never underestimate how a lie can organize people. Donald Trump, and with the help of the Republican Party, has sold us on this big, fat ass lie, right? He won a campaign, and now he's governing with it. And so I wish I were Mexican, although I love being Filipino. So for me, it's been really tough because people just automatically assume that I'm that, right? And it's been tough for me because I'm working on this book, which has been really tough. And I hadn't really internalized, I hadn't really examined how I've internalized people's expectations of what I'm supposed to be because of what they want my narrative to be, right? So to answer your very quick question briefly, I got here because of what people would call chain migration. So my grandfather, who got me here, was petitioned by his sister, who married an army man. So when my grandfather's sister got here in 1964, she then petitioned my grandfather through the sibling, right? That's part of which will be taken away under Trump's proposal. So through sibling reunification, my grandfather was able to come in 1984. He could not bring my mother because my mother was already married. So you can't bring adult children who are married. He couldn't bring me here legally because you can't petition a grandchild. It's not part at all of any of the system. So he decided to smuggle me here when I was 12. And then when I was 16, I found out I was smuggled. But this is where I'm saying this to contextualize again how you can't separate quote unquote legal migration from quote unquote illegal immigration, right? Like our families are, so the 1.8 million people in this Sophie's Choice bargain, I don't know what else to call it. So basically they're saying, we'll give you 1.8 million people and we'll dare call them citizens, but let's screw everybody else. So what is happening now within those 1.8 million family members and how they're talking to their own uncles and aunts and grandparents and parents about, okay, this may be good for us, but I guess we don't really care about you anymore. That's the conversation that the media, Joy, I don't think understand. And why is that, Joy?
I think because they're not having that experience. I mean, like you, my mother got here in 60. She got here before my father did. She sponsored in her brother, who brought in my cousins. He actually couldn't sponsor his own children. She ended up sponsoring several of my cousins. The vast majority of my first cousins were born in Guyana and brought over here, many of whom got their paperwork done by my mother. And many of them lived in our house. So they would come over, stay with us, get themselves together, move wherever they were gonna move. And like you, without so-called chain migration, 90% of the people in my family would not be here.
And how many family members is that? Mine's 34.
It's a lot. Yeah, it's probably, at this point, the Carrolls, there were 11 children, 3 didn't survive. So of the 11, 8 came here, 8 of my mother and 7 of her siblings ended up eventually here. And then you extrapolate that to cousins, it's gotta be 50 people, right? I mean, it's dozens
and again,
of people.
So to add the number, we're actually not talking about 1.8 million people. There are 43 million immigrants in America today. 43 million, 11 million of whom are undocumented, right? 1.8 million of whom would qualify for this. The 43 million figure is where America is going through this really unprecedented demographic change. According to Pew, 88% of the total US population growth of the next 50 years are gonna come from those 43 million people. I don't know, white people are not having as many babies as y'all used to have. I don't know what's happening. So basically, this is really re-engineering what this country looks like.
Right.
And I think maybe, you know, the failure of people in the news media, of our colleagues in the news media, to bring the racial and demographic aspect of this is what I find incredibly lacking.
Yeah.
So how can they do that better?
You know, partly the conversation is we spend a lot of time talking to Trump voters and sort of anthropologizing them and sort of observing them in the wild and being fascinated by them.
Why are you so hurt?
What is the source of your
curious.
economic
I'm very
anxiety?
curious.
Yeah,
Yes,
who hurt you? And we spend a lot of time doing that. We don't spend a lot of time getting past the drama of the undocumented immigrant who's being whisked away. We just had the dad that's the chemistry teacher dragged away. We're sort of doing a good job of showing the tragedy of watching the crying, screaming children as their fathers dragged away. But we're not going deeper, and as you said, talking with these extended families and what they lose when they lose a parent, a son, a daughter. I don't think we're talking to enough people, right? And maybe we're not also talking to the right people, because as we just discussed, when we do want to do the story, we're going right to the Mexican Americans, who, by the way, they're like Germans if all the Germans had been in Colorado, California, New Mexico, Arizona, Arizona, Colorado. I mean, all the names are even Mexican, right? So they were already there. A lot of people were already there. So that's, you know, it's something we also don't contextualize the history. And I wonder, do you think that that people just don't know enough people to talk to, or that maybe the story has just been so limited by the political debate, which again, as you said, is about Mexican migration?
So I didn't know. At Define American, we teamed up with MTV to do a film called White People. It's on YouTube, check it out. It's literally called White People. It was interesting. But working on the film, I didn't realize, having grown up in the Bay Area, California, that most white people live within white people. I knew it when I go to Iowa or Nebraska, but to see just the sheer number, 3/4 of white people live within white people, right? 90% of white people only have white friends. So meaning you know us through what news media and what entertainment media inform you who we are. That's why Define American, we actually did this groundbreaking project, actually studying how immigrants are being portrayed in television. Right? Particularly Latino and Asian immigrants, right? So I think there's such a disconnect, and the success of Fox News, like it is not an accident, right? That the propaganda machine that is Fox News has enabled this entire thing, right? Is Geraldo still on Fox News?
Yes. He survived the opening the empty vault, and he's still working.
Meaning, if you think about it, the story that we tell ourselves as a country is not the complete story. And part of what we do at Define American, especially now, because Joy knows this, a lot of what we do is really fact-checking. So Joy was just looking at this page. I know that you're gonna go to defineamerican.com when you get home, and we have this fact sheet. Everything you ever need to know to talk about immigration. It's really a good source for uncomfortable conversations. Like you print it out and give it to somebody at work and be like, oh, look, right? But these facts are unfortunately not the kind of facts that journalists themselves know about what this issue is. I can't tell you how many times I go on television, CNN, it's happened once on MSNBC, of course not with Joy, where literally the host, before we go on air, goes, why can't you just go fix this thing? Bill Maher said that to me once. I know, I'm sorry, Bill. I just totally outed you on that. Bill was like, I don't understand why you can't just fix this thing. Milo has a green card. Why can't you? I'm like,
just go and fix it. Fix your green card status.
So what? This has been a 7-year kind of like, but that's literally where we are with this issue. People don't know what the facts of the issue are. And contextualizing it and understanding how the stories we've told each other has gotten us to this point. I mean, in many ways, Trump, as we all know, is a manifestation of all the lies and the delusions that we have in this country. And it's not an accident that he picked an issue that most people don't really know about.
Right.
And say, look, blame them, right? I want to talk about, Joy, like that moment we had a couple of weeks ago when we were literally texting each other talking about how do you broaden this conversation?
Yeah.
And how do we bring, the attack on Haitians because of TPS, the fact that the anti-blackness that has been built within the constitution of this country, that the anti-blackness that within our own Asian and Latino immigrant families we deal with, how do we kind of unpack all of that?
Yeah, and I think one of the things you talk about Fox News that you're starting to see happen is the criminalizing narrative of criminalizing brown people, and often including trying to get black people to share in that fear of brown people, getting these communities to fear each other. And I want to, maybe talk a little bit about the fact that they're trying to sort of build a respectability politics around the DACA community to say these are the special immigrants we can save, but the rest of the immigrants are all criminals. They're all gang members. I mean, we know from the fact sheet, in order to even get DACA, you have to give a biometric sample. Most Americans would not allow the government to take a biometric sample from them. But if you're in DACA, you have to do it. You can't have any felony convictions. You have to be enrolled or graduated from school. You actually have to be sort of a model citizen more than the average American. So, I mean, I'll throw the question back at you. Do you think that this idea of trying to criminalize immigrants broadly and then pit black versus brown versus Asian and get them fighting and saying these are the special immigrants and the rest of you are criminals, is that working?
It's working, and I would argue that it's the most dangerous thing in this entire enterprise. Joy and I have been talking about what kind of work we want to do together even more, but addressing again how systematically anti-blackness has been woven into the culture of this country, and the fact that in many of our immigrant families, that's been a part of our experience. To be in America means you embrace whiteness and you reject blackness, right? This is very dangerous, and in my opinion, hasn't been as discussed as it should be.
Yeah.
And to your point, by the way, this idea of creating the model citizen, right? Or the acceptable, this is why the language that John Kelly, the chief of staff, just said about, it's almost as if we should be so grateful.
Right.
Right. That the 1.8 million of us will now be included. I love that term, Roberto. Membership.
Yeah.
Right.
Even though they were too lazy. We'll forgive them for being too lazy. The model citizens applied, the rest were too lazy.
And, a lot of the criticism that I get from immigrant communities is that I perpetuate the good immigrant model minority thing. I wonder sometimes if it's some Asian, it's an Asian, I don't know. And my thing on that is the weight now that these immigrants carry to be expected to be perfect, right? To be expected to be infallible.
Right.
To be expected not to make any mistakes. Can you imagine if we went to any single high school here in the Boston area, picked out a random sample of kids and said, how perfect are you going to be? Mm-hmm. Would you pay your government $495 so that the government doesn't deport you and can give you a driver's license and let you work and you can pay taxes to it? You understand that as taxpayers, undocumented people have paid billions of dollars into the tax system that is now detaining and deporting us. And the biggest tragedy of it? People don't even know that's happening.
They don't know. Well, they don't know that. They don't know, and it has to be renewed every 2 years.
Every 2 years.
So you're having to pay the government, you're having to pay into Social Security and Medicare, which you're not guaranteed to ever get back. So keeping our system more robust. You're having to, in some cases, in this, back to the fact sheet, you've got 54% of DACA recipients bought their first car. If you deport them, do they still have to make the car payments? What happens to the bank to whom they owe that car payment? Or if they bought their first house, which is
12%.
The case for 12%, do they have to pay that mortgage from wherever they're deported to? What happens to the mortgage
I'm going to share this thing that I haven't really shared publicly before. But last year, the first year of the Trump presidency, I was in LA. I was living in LA at the time. I was driving. There's a lot of, LA, California, by the way, is only one of 12 states that allow us to drive. One of 12. Massachusetts is not one of them. I'm sure Ted Kennedy is going like, what? So New York, Massachusetts, Florida, Texas, undocumented people can't drive. About 210,000 undocumented people in the state of Massachusetts. So I guess your subway system is okay. How are they getting around? I don't know. So I was driving. I was stuck in traffic. I checked my phone because, I was really, LA traffic. And I got an email from Bank of America that I've been a member of since I was in high school, since my principal actually taught me how to open a bank account. And the subject line of the email was ready to buy a home. And I have been so just like holding on to all of my anger and anxiety and tension that I actually stopped the car. I pulled over. I was on 101. I pulled over. I called the number, and I just went. I felt bad for this woman, Pamela. I was like, what do you mean? Is this my home? Do you want me to buy? I mean, I can buy a home. I have enough money in the bank that I can put a down payment, but what should I, is this my home? Do you want me is this, like, how do you define home?
Right.
She was like, son, are you okay? And then I explained, she's in Texas. I explained to her what was going on and that I'm undocumented, and she had no idea what this thing was. By the end of the call, she goes, oh, I voted for Ted Cruz. I'm sure Ted Cruz is gonna wanna help you out. And I was like, no, Pamela.
No.
I have to tell you, Pamela, she has 2 kids, both in college. I'm sorry, I'm a reporter. I have to ask questions. So the empathy emanating from this 35-minute phone call, because I just went off, and she could tell that I was just in this bad place. And then I'm thinking, oh my God, look, they don't even know us.
Yeah.
They don't even know, right? And I have to say, since we're at Harvard, I've just learned from Roberto that there's about 60 students here, both at the college level and the grad school level, who have DACA or are undocumented. Given the leadership position that this institution has, what kind of leadership, what kind of continued leadership, loud, vibrant, uncompromising leadership, is this university willing to take to not only deal with the educational aspects of all of this, but the mental, toll that this takes on people. You guys are incredibly lucky to have Roberto Gonzales here, like one of, if not the leading scholar in studying what this has done. But I just feel really, I feel really strongly, given how big your endowment is, I looked, that if there was ever a time to build some sort of a resource center that studies what's going on and to take leadership, this would be it.
Yeah. Well, and
Right.
can you expand that a little bit? Because when you talk about 1.8 million
Yes.
DACA, and then you add to them the millions of people who are on TPS, who are threatening to be deported back to Haiti, a country that cannot
Yep.
handle them at all,
Cannot
or
handle
to
them
El
all.
Salvador that cannot handle them, and people who are at risk. If you extrapolate those numbers, you're talking about 6, 7, 8 million people in their families, because the psychological toll has to be
Yes.
extended, right? It's on the families as well.
So that's why I think thinking of what we're dealing with as a family issue, thinking of it as not only a Latino issue, to me is incredibly important. And making sure that we're connecting the dots that we're supposed to be connecting. This is why, by the way, the organization that we have is called Define American. We didn't call it Define Immigrant.
Right.
Right? Especially given, again, the demographic makeup of what we're dealing with and the fact that you cannot separate immigration from all of these other issues. You cannot. Immigrant rights is a Black Lives Matter issue.
Yep.
It's a women's rights issue.
Absolutely.
It's an LGBTQ issue. It's a Muslim issue.
Absolutely.
Right? But unfortunately, we're not living in a kind of environment culturally that wants to, it's almost like, we can't chew gum and walk at the same time, right? Listening, I don't know, Joy, I'm gonna ask you this question. I don't know how you felt listening to that State of the Union speech.
Well, first of all, I had to go to work to watch it. And so I was sort of a captive audience for Donald Trump. I find his speeches personally chilling. I'll be honest with you, because they intentionally exclude me as a woman, as a person of color, as an immigrant, a daughter of immigrants, as a daughter of Black immigrants. I almost physically feel the exclusion. I almost physically feel that he's talking past me, that I am not intended to be included in Make America Great Again. And so it's difficult because there's nothing else like the presidency. We don't have a king, obviously, although some people in the White House might think we do. But we impart to the president that sort of singular national moral authority we traditionally have.
With global implications.
With global implications. We sort of give them the power to exert what, the British Crown calls the dignified, right? They sort of speak to what America is. They're our national avatar. And then they also sort of wield this executive power that works with the legislative. So they have a special power. So when someone uses that pulpit to essentially say, this entire block of people are not American. You're not legitimately American. And I decide that only this group of people are American. I'm going to empower them. There's just a piece that's on, somebody posted to Twitter, a young Asian American woman who's getting ranted at by somebody who yells Donald Trump and we're going to deport you and where are you from? Go back to your country. She's from California. That's the kind of country we're living in now. And the name of the President of the United States is an epithet that's being hurled at people of color. We've had racist presidents before. Woodrow Wilson was a racist. I mean, there have been lots of racists, but we've never had one where just their name is a slur to be used on people of color. I mean, for you, this has to be, I don't know if you feel the same way, if it feels personal.
It's, as I said, I was telling Joy that I'm doing this book, which has been really just excruciating because I didn't realize how much I've had to divorce myself from myself to just be able to function, right? I'm a highly functioning person. I've also been, I think, depressed since I was 16, running away from this country since it told me that I wasn't supposed to be here. And so in my head is this chorus of, I'm a lawbreaker, I'm not supposed to be here, I'm not an American. It's like some bad chorus and a bad dissonant melody playing in my head. And I feel like my existence in the past 21 years has been proving that song wrong. But dealing with what we're dealing with, I've had to now marry the two. Like, I can't separate myself anymore from what I've built. And this feeling of psychological homelessness. I did something that maybe I should not have done, which is that I moved out. Since I graduated from high school, this is the first time I don't have a place. After the election, Trump's election, my lawyer said that it was no longer safe to have a permanent address if they issue a warrant of arrest. I got arrested in Texas almost 4 summers ago, and they issued a warrant. It's a notice to appear, but Obama was president, they never filed it. Well, the warrant is still there, and if the Trump administration decides that they want to catch me, they can just issue it. So the lawyer said, you might want to move out of your apartment. I knew that it was real when the building manager, who likes what we do at Deferred American, and he sees me on TV, he's texted me and said, it may not be safe for you to stay here. It's like, you're the building manager, what? So I moved out, and so I'm now living off suitcases, living with friends, and it's helped me deal with, again, not being delusional about my circumstances. And mind you, you're talking to somebody who has resources and has means, right? I wonder what's happening to people who don't have that. Again, this feeling of, I don't even call it displacement.
Yeah.
I've been reading a lot of Toni Morrison lately just to get myself into the clean language of Toni Morrison, just the clarity and the cleanness of how she writes about, I remember the first book I read when I was in middle school was The Bluest Eye. And, I just got to the country 2 years before. What is this black-white thing? What? So I had really researched that book. I went to the library before there was Google and had to read those microfiches stuff, And I remember I found an article that explained what the book was. And apparently Toni Morrison said she wrote the book to show what happens when you surrender to the master narrative. So she wanted to write about what it felt like. Who told this young black girl that she was ugly and why did she believe it? Was why she wrote the book. And so now in rereading those early novels that I read when I was a kid, I'm like, man, who told us we were illegal and why did we believe it? And now it's not just what people say or what the New York Times and the Washington Post, who still call us illegal. It's now, what do they say at church about us? What does the president say about us? How does that funnel through from the presidency, the pulpit of the presidency, all the way down to these communities that are predominantly white, who are suffering themselves and are in so much pain, and they don't know who to blame, and now the president telling them who to blame, and go blame them.
Yeah.
Right.
And do we focus it too much, in your view, on Donald Trump? I mean, you just had Paul Gosar, a congressman from Arizona, say that he would like to see arrests of any undocumented people who showed up with Democratic members of Congress at the State of the Union. He wanted to see arrests in the well of Congress. You have the Congressional Hispanic Caucus now looking to censure him, but are we personalizing it too much to Donald Trump when it's his party more broadly?
I have to say, by the way, so I'm neither a Republican nor a Democrat. I've never voted, although there's a lie that goes around that we're voting. What do we vote with? A Bank of America debit card? Like, what are we gonna vote with, yo? Like, see, I can't tell you how many times on Twitter people are like, have you voted for Hillary? I covered Hillary, but no. So you're absolutely, Joy. And I feel like the Republican Party has been incredibly complicit. You know, I had a conversation once, very privately, and I'm now going to make it public. Paul Ryan, talking about his great-grandparents who came here after the potato famine, right? And how he wanted to get immigration reform done because of them. Where's that Paul Ryan? Right. By the way, when the Irish people, I've been fascinated with Irish history because I didn't know much about it. So when I was making White People, I read a book called How the Irish Became White. I didn't know anything about that. And then kind of investigating that and then realizing that when people say to us that we should do it the right way, that there was not a right way for them to do, they just showed up. Right? There was no visa requirements. They didn't have to pay $495. Nobody asked them, hey, are you good enough? Are you going to be smart enough? What's your merit? Right? What are you going to contribute? How are you going to be how are you going to be a member of America?
Right.
So I find this whole thing, and in my research for the book that I'm working on, I didn't realize that one of the grievances that the founding fathers had against King George was that King George was limiting the trade of goods and the migration of people. Let me repeat this. In our own Declaration of Independence, one of the grievances against the king was trying to limit migration. That the founders wanted to make sure that people could come. And of course, a few years later, the Alien and Seditions Act, right? So a country founded on slavery and genocide and immigration who've always wanted to keep immigrants out. That's what we're living with. Well, we have a president who do you think the president has read the Declaration of Independence?
Oh, goodness, no. John Kelly today said that he had not read the Minority Report, the Democrats' memo on, that's the sort of answer to the Nunes memo, because it's too long. It's 10 pages. So if that's too long, he's not going to sit down and read the parts of the Constitution.
So, Joy, what's our way forward here? Like, how do we make clearly? And again, like I'm privileged enough to have a relationship with Joy where I can be like, hey, Joy, like what do you think of this for the show this weekend, right? Like we can. Unfortunately, there's just not. People in the media, the news media, whose job it is to explain what's happening to us, are not just doing the job to do that. Yeah. But I feel like, Joy is only one person. I'm only one person.
Right.
So what collectively, outside of downloading our fact sheet, what else can we do?
Yeah, I think for one thing, this is where the diversity conversation gets real. When you don't have newsrooms that have enough people of color, of enough variety, who can speak to their own family experiences, you don't have enough people in the room to raise their hand and say, wait a minute, this story is not just about Mexican migration. It's bigger than that. It's about the Muslims that are afraid to go home from college because they're afraid they won't be able to get back in because of the ban. It's about Haitian Americans who are American in every other way and would not make it in Port-au-Prince, somewhere dropped off where they've never really been. They're here since they were children, some which detained as children, and then being sent back to a country that is economically unstable and incapable of taking care of them. Just the idea of any of these DACA recipients, some of them have children here. I don't know if you saw the Jimmy Kimmel piece where the MAGA team, the MAGA members were saying, well, you need to go home. Your baby was born here, so the baby can stay. The baby's 2. The baby can stay, but you, the mom, go. And that's the way it has to be. I mean, the sort of harshness and sort of cruelty of that.
Because it's legal.
Right.
So again, and I don't want to get too academic on this, but I really feel that our own sense of what our history is, and the fact that we have so much amnesia and so much blindness around it, that's not acceptable anymore. Like, what are we teaching students in middle school, elementary school, and high schools about the founding of this country? I guess we had this incredibly, incredible article, I think it was Time Magazine, that they're totally whitewashing the teaching of slavery in classrooms.
Right. Yeah.
Right? So there's that. There's the diversity thing. But for me, though, like...
Well, you mentioned German history. I mean, the Drumpfs,
Yes.
right? Friedrich Drumpf arrives in 1895, goes up and tries to make it in the Alaska Gold Rush, can't find any gold in the Alaska Gold Rush, so he ends up running prostitutes, essentially, tries to go back to Bavaria. Bavaria says, you can't stay, Friedrich Drumpf, because you didn't do your military service, essentially you were dodging the draft, comes back, right, has a son, Fred. They changed their name to Trump because Fred is selling real estate, selling homes in New York, and realizes in the 1930s that being German might not be good for business in an area with a lot of Jewish people. Changed his name to Trump.
Yep.
Tells people they're Swedish, tells his son they're Swedish, all the way up until someone else writes The Art of the Deal and he puts his name on it, where he's still telling people he's Swedish. Yep. So the fluidity of identity, even in Donald Trump's own family, right, has allowed Friedrich Drumpf, who came here speaking no English at 16 years old, not in the founding era of the country, not one of the people who's grinding away in the early days of the country, almost at the 1900s, right, almost in the 20th century, is able to morph into the current president who's saying he's deciding who's really American.
And one of his masterminds, Stephen Miller, right? Like,
Yeah.
we had a graphic at Define America, and we've been sharing that Stephen Miller's own grandmother only spoke Yiddish.
Yeah.
Couldn't speak, that was the only language. So why is that allowed, and speaking Spanish or Tagalog or Mandarin is somewhat offensive?
Right.
But for me, though, it becomes to what conversations are each of you willing to have with your own coworkers and your own family members about what this is? How do you help us fight this whole, let's save the 1.8 perfect people and divide them from the 11 million and the rest? Like, how uncomfortable are you willing to get, right? Because I think that, to me, is the biggest question.
Yeah.
I would be remiss before we start taking your questions if I didn't ask Joy, like, where do you think this goes? So here we are. A shutdown might happen on Friday.
Yep.
The deadline is March 5th, a month from today.
Yeah.
So what happens if there is no solution come March 5th? What do you think is going to happen?
Well, I mean, I think when you have Mitch McConnell saying that he will brook no shutdown and still separating the issue of immigration from the funding of the government, that's a very ominous and bad sign.
That's a bad sign.
That the Republicans are not willing to make a deal. When you have Paul Ryan today, who was essentially in the service of Donald Trump at this point, saying that they will not even consider a bill that the White House does not approve of, that the president does not approve of. And when the president is saying the only bill he will approve of must end what they call chain migration, actually a term we in the media should just not use, quite frankly, because it isn't a real thing. It's a made-up term.
Actually, Twitter, can we all say that? Joy Reid says at Harvard, the media should stop using chain migration.
And illegal. These two terms are so offensive. It's shocking to me that we're just adopting it wholesale because Stephen Miller wants to call it that, right? So I think, it's family migration. It's the same way that all my family got here. It's family migration. So Donald Trump wants to end family migration, essentially creating second-class citizens of immigrants and saying you can't bring your aunt or your uncle or your cousin here anymore. And he wants this wall, which if we are going to continue for Democrats to say Democrats believe it's immoral, then how would they give into it? So I think we're at an impasse. I think we're at another shutdown. And I think Democrats, because they are the party, the Republican Party is 90% white, if not more, and the Democratic Party is very multiracial and diverse. They are under incredible pressure to stand up to the Republicans on this and to not give in. So I think we're at an impasse that's going to be very, very difficult to brook. And I question, as you do, whether it would be moral for Democrats to give in on a deal that only gets DACA and leaves out Haitians who are on TPS, El Salvador.
I don't know if I can do that. And I personally, I don't know how I can look at my grandmothers and my aunts and my uncles in the eye and say, I don't think we can do that. At the same time, having said that, I was meeting with some undocumented students here before this event. This is really going to require an enormous amount of creativity. Like, all of us now, institutions, employers, are going to be tested. So, for example, Tim Cook has said, I forget the number of how many DACA employees they have at Apple. So right now, 17,000 DACA recipients have lost their status. Every day, I think 1,700 lose their status. Every day, we don't find a solution. So if the DACA employer at Apple, Microsoft, or whatever company loses their status, what is that employer going to do.
Right.
We have 20,000 DACA teachers, 20,000 teachers who have DACA teaching in public schools. 5,000 of whom are in California. I met somebody who's in a charter school in the Bay Area, actually, who reached out to me and said that the person in charge of the school, the charter school, let him go because his DACA expired. And I had to reach out to the head of the school and said, can we get a little bit more creative here? What if he's an independent contractor?
Yeah.
Right? Now, all of this, by the way, is legal gray area, right? But guess what? This is America. Like the same America that always made sure that we know that legality doesn't equal justice. The same America that in many ways have, I mean, look at gerrymandering and everything that's happening.
Yeah.
Should we be looking at this as a legal issue? Should that just be the prism in which we look at it?
Yeah. Well, I mean, we don't look at it that way when, the federal government is tearing up treaties with Native American tribes, right? We don't stick to the letter of the law and things like that. So it's a difficult area. And the other piece of it is that now you have the Justice Department under Jefferson Sessions going after cities who are trying to protect people and saying, we'll protect our immigrants. They want to try to take funding away from them, from their police, which will make the cities less safe. So it's going to be it's a Rubik's Cube, and I'm not sure how you
But this is where I think every community is going to get tested, and we're all going to get tested at some point through all this in terms of what are we willing to do? What are we willing to overlook? What are we willing to say, you know what, right? It's not about legal, it's about right and wrong. What's wrong here, right? And again, we've been here before. Our history, we've been a lot of times before. I think what's different is the fact that we have such a fractured news ecosystem and the fact that you have an openly racist, like this is a whole other level of racism. It's a whole other level.
And you don't have the presidential leadership. I mean, we've been here before in the 1980s, and Ronald Reagan instantly imparted legal status to 5 million people. Straight amnesty.
Straight amnesty.
Not
no merit.
No merit, just straight ahead amnesty. And that's Ronald Reagan, the icon of Republican, political sort of, civic religion. So it can be done with presidential leadership, but we have a president who's made it very clear from the moment he came down the golden escalator how he feels about people of color.
The golden escalator.
He came down the golden escalator.
I think that should be the name of the movie.
Maybe that's the movie.
All right, I think we have to transition now to questions from the audience.
Yes, absolutely.
Yes,
please, thank you.
So I don't know about you, but I could listen to this all night. Another round of applause for Joy and Jose. So there are mics on either side if people want to start queuing up. For those of you who have questions, if you want to start queuing up. A couple of notes here. We're live streaming, and so this is being filmed. Audience members are not being filmed, so you feel free to ask a question. People don't need to identify themselves by name, and we'll
repeat the question so that people watching know what we just got asked. Before we start, by the way, let me just say that so now Joy Reid and I are calling in all of our colleagues in the news media to sign on the Words Matter pledge at Define American and stop using chain migration and stop calling human beings illegal.
Yes, please. Ladies first.
Thank you. Well, thank you both for being here, and thank you, Jose, for returning. I actually remember coming to one of your talks, I think it was maybe 2 years ago.
Oh, yeah.
So thanks for coming back. So my question is in regards to grassroots activism, which could, I think, be attributed, really, the success of DACA, the fact that DACA even happened. I think it's always sort of attributed like Obama administration did this, like Obama gave us this. Yeah, sure, he signed a paper. However, it took hundreds and thousands of student activists, young people who were undocumented for the most part, to really expose themselves in ways that, they got arrested like you did too. And, they did sit-ins. They, basically were very annoying for, for years. I mean, this has been going on since the early
2004,
2000s.
2003, I
I
think,
started
yeah.
following it in like 2005 when I was about to graduate from high school myself. So it's been ongoing, and so yeah, it was really thanks to them that all of this happened, and that they really got on people's nerves. And against, I think probably the advice of other immigrants or activists who are saying, don't, why are you doing this to the Democrats? They're our friends. You shouldn't be doing sit-ins. You shouldn't be heckling them because they're working for you. But that's actually really what kind of shamed people into doing things and taking action. So my question would be, how do you see now with this completely different climate, sitting activism, grassroots activism, how does that go forward now that if you do a sitting, you no longer have that sort of sense of security you might have had when Obama was president, that yes, they might arrest you, but they're probably not going to actually deport you. A lot of the times they ended up being like in your case that, nothing kind of came out of it.
Yeah.
But we can't, expect that anymore. What do you?
First of all, I think I just really acknowledge, if you haven't read Roberto Gonzales' book, Lives in Limbo, I highly encourage you to do that. There's a book that just came out, I think it's maybe out, called The Making of a Dream, that chronicles 5 grassroots activists, I think in like a span of 8 years that just came out. Absolutely the work, when I started doing this work as a reporter, the first thing I had to figure out was who's everybody, right? Like, what's United with Dream? What's Dream Activists? Who's Gabi Pacheco? What's the difference between the people doing stuff in DC versus people doing stuff in Arizona? To be undocumented in Arizona is not the same thing as to be undocumented in Georgia, like all of that, absolutely, right? But at this moment that we're at, I have to say, and this is something, I'm not a grassroots organizer, that's just not what I do, that's not my training, but there's people, of course, on our staff at Defiant American, that's what they do. For me, though, the question is, especially as you said, in this moment that we're at, how are we expanding this conversation, right? Like, we had this retreat at Defiant American a couple of weeks ago in New Orleans, actually. The question we were asking our team is, what is our white people and our black people strategy, right? Meaning, look, the grassroots organized, especially at this moment, are doing everything they can to inform community to make sure that they know what their rights are. I would really implore you to really research where you come from, all these organizations that have these really valuable know your rights tools, so that if somebody gets arrested in front of you, you know exactly what to do. So people are already doing that work. I would argue that we have not expanded this conversation to the extent that people who don't know what DACA is or TPS is or even know what the facts are, right? How do we broaden that? For us at Defiant American, we're really proud. Actually, Julian, our college organizer, is here. We have 52 Defiant American college chapters across the country. Our most active one is in Lincoln, Nebraska.
Wow.
And what I like is that it's undocumented students with white, black, Asian people, students, talking about Defiant American with the broader campus. And one of the mandates is, how do you bring this conversation to people who are not having it? So for me, that's a part of grassroots organizing that has to important to happen. I have to say, by the way, there's no official Defiant American chapter at Harvard yet, and we're hoping that can happen.
Thank you.
What's your name again?
I'm Erica.
Yeah.
Thanks
And I
for asking that
actually
question.
went to school with Gabi Pacheco and that group, so I am familiar with what they did and some of the people who are in different states, but mostly with like the activists in Florida.
Yeah.
Can I just add one thing? I mean, we're in this year, this is this sort of jubilee year of the civil rights movement, and and we're thinking a lot about the way activism actually works. If you go back and you look at the model, and I think I always encourage people to read the history.
Yep.
The civil rights movement was probably the most successful mass grassroots movement in American history. It took about 16 years for it to be effective, right? So it took a long time. I mean, Dr. King's public career alone started from 1954, 55, all the way through 68 when he was 25 years old.
He was 25.
And a lot of the civil rights movement was actually conducted by students. SNCC were all students, they were kids. But what they did that I think is important, that Black Lives Matter and that the DACA movement can learn from, is that as Jose said, there's all these different strands that you have to take care of. So the SNCC kids were doing the sit-ins. They were sitting at the Woolworth's lunch counter. But when they needed funding to get from their college in North Carolina down to Mississippi, The Southern Christian Leadership Conference, which was church-based, it was mostly pastors, were raising the money. They were partnering with unions and other organizations, religious organizations, big national groups. Like, that was their white people strategy, right?
Yep.
Was they had a white people strategy to raise the money. They had Hollywood activists, people like Carrie Belafonte, who were writing checks. They weren't necessarily the ones marching, they were writing the checks. They had lawyers who were designated never to get arrested, so that when King gets arrested, the designated lawyer guy doesn't get arrested. He's there to bail them out. You have these interlocking pieces that all had to work together. I think a lot of movements today, particularly movements of young people, are very isolated.
Yes.
They just isolate themselves within themselves, and they don't stratify themselves out to deal with other organizations. Partnering different groups together. The Free South Africa movement was the same thing. You had the Congressional Black Caucus constantly advocating for the United States to divest from South Africa. It connected to campus movements that were constantly, for years, advocating on campuses to end U.S. doing business with the South African government. International groups that were reaching out to the similar groups in Europe. You have to connect yourself to other people.
Yes.
Students alone cannot fight Jeff Sessions and the full armada of the federal government. This is not like, remember, the March on Washington was not a march in favor of John F. Kennedy. It was a march on John F. Kennedy. It was a march on his administration. They marched on a friendly administration. They sent 250,000 people not to praise the Kennedy administration, but to agitate against it and to demand that they hurry up with civil rights. And when Johnson came in, they agitated against him. But somebody was on the phone talking to him. So you always had an arm of the civil rights movement that was talking to power. They weren't allergic to negotiating with those in power. So I think what these organizations need to do is partner with other groups, particularly groups across the racial spectrum. There are groups that have histories in Black civil rights activism that can be helpful to you. They have a history, they have connections, they can help you. So I think you've got to start to mobilize these white, Black, Latino, Asian American groups, get them together, and then you need someone to talk to. And I'll tell you right now, you probably don't have that in the Justice Department, but work with the party you've got. Like, if the Democrats are willing to negotiate, hold their feet to the fire. Don't give them a free pass, but somebody needs to be on the phone with them too.
Well, thank you so much for that.
Thank you.
Thank you. I want to continue what Joy is saying and talk. My name is Barney Brower. I attended this institution many years ago, and I'm a teacher and a former school principal. And I want to talk about white people strategy, because there's history that is not widely known. In the fugitive slave law era of the 1850s, Anthony Burns was a fugitive slave who took refuge near Faneuil Hall. 50,000 Bostonians were in the streets. In 1854, 50,000 Bostonians turned out to try to prevent the return of Anthony Burns to slavery. It's a great book called Anthony Burns by Virginia Hamilton, and if you Google him, Anthony Burns, he's the only Anthony Burns who comes up, so you get the whole story, okay? And I think the question for us, if there are 60 undocumented people here at Harvard
that we know of, but
that we know
I think
of,
it's more than that, yeah.
If the government comes for them, will we close the gates and be a real sanctuary?
Yeah.
Yeah. A lot of churches are doing that.
Well, I'm curious what President, I'm sorry, is it Faust?
Faust.
I can't wait to ask questions and try to figure out what else can be done.
And in 1970, when Bobby Seale was on trial in New Haven, and I lived in New Haven, the university was opened up to 20,000 demonstrators who came and ate in the dining halls and slept. And it wasn't easy. The first women had just arrived at Yale. And it was a white community saying, we're in this together, and we have privilege which we can put our bodies and ourselves on the line to protect those who don't have that privilege. And I urge you to be inspired by Anthony Burns and by 50,000, there weren't 50,000 black people in Boston then.
Right.
50,000 mostly white abolitionists in the streets of what was called Brattle Street, Boston, which is now under City Hall Plaza. But it was down there, it was at Faneuil Hall, places we know. And it's an inspiring story of what it means for a community to say, we are standing with one fugitive slave, we are standing with 60 Harvard-affiliated people, and we're going to stand with the people who live in Somerville who are not Harvard-affiliated, but who can be invited inside Harvard Yard with the gates locked while we put our bodies, ourselves, on the lot for them.
Thank you.
Hi, my name is Diana, and I graduated from Harvard Divinity last May. I was one of the undocumented students. Yesterday, I got my green card in the mail. No thanks to a policy, but thanks to my husband. So my question is, I recently came out in a video for Senator Warren, and it was posted on her newsfeed actually yesterday. And one of my friends sent it to me, hey, you're on her newsfeed. And I was reading through the comments, which you should or shouldn't do, depending on how thick your skin is. And one of the comments that said, how can, a Harvard student not be smart enough to apply for her documents? And, my instinct was, let me just educate this person on immigration policy, and I did write a comment, then I posted it. Then I deleted it, I'm like, oh, my full name came out in that comment, and I don't want to be targeted. So my question is, often when the legal status or when they know that you're undocumented, it's a conversation stopper for anti-immigrant people who just can't see beyond the legal status kind of question. I'm wondering if you have had an experience where someone or knew someone who was anti-immigrant who slowly kind of got educated and maybe hopefully became an ally. And I'm wondering if you can talk about that story, because I like to believe that there is hope for anti-immigrant people who were kind of conditioned to believe what they believe to really be able to become allies.
Well, okay, so thank you for the question. Let me just separate, though, the crazies from the real people. So I can't tell you how many times I've been offered to debate and culture, either on live television or at some big event, and I've always said no. I'm trying to sell a book, I will still say no. I am just not interested in the theatrics of that, right? So I think there are people that we're just never gonna reach because they don't want to be reached.
Gotcha.
I would argue that the greater number of people are the people who just don't know what the hell this is. To me, and I've had numerous experiences, across this country, dealing with all kinds of people and all kinds of white people. That's why, by the way, I've gone on Fox News, even though I don't want to go on Fox News, because it's tough, right? Is because usually what happens is somebody would watch me, and then the president of the Chamber of Commerce in Nebraska is like, I just saw you, I'm confused. You're not even Mexican. Can you come talk to our Chamber of Commerce? Right? And then I would bring my tax forms. I would bring my Social Security, because, according to Social Security people, I paid $180,000 into Social Security. And then I called them, and they're like, yeah, but we're not giving that back. Right? You're not. So I would bring those, and the people in the Chamber of Commerce meetings, all of whom are Republicans in Nebraska, were so confused. They were like, what? Why don't we know this?
Yeah.
Well, because Fox News isn't telling you that. So absolutely, I think it's a question of how much are you willing to invest in that, because it takes a toll. I would be lying to you if I didn't tell you that I take breaks. Because it's tough when your existence is always an explanation.
Yeah.
I always have to be your immigration for dummies.
Yep.
Right? So you have to take care of yourself, but absolutely do not lose hope and optimism in the fact that when people know what it is, they actually change their minds on it. That's why for us at Define American, we have invested in a completely storytelling strategy. Right? And it's not one thing, it's several things. One of the people that we just got to meet is this undocumented DACA recipient who is the Lady Gaga drag performer in Houston. Apparently, there are a lot of DACA recipients who are drag performers in the city of Houston. And I'm like, yo, RuPaul is like one of the most, like, the Drag Race is like one of the most popular shows on television. I want DACA recipients who are drag performers.
I need to see this show.
Isn't it a great show?
This sounds amazing.
So I'm like, but she is gonna completely reach a different crowd than when I go on a certain show. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
So it can't be one people, it can't just be one thing. It's totally layered. Yeah.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Question over here.
Hi, first, thank you guys both so much for being here. I admire you both so much. My question is, how can communities of color and also other marginalized communities better be sort of co-conspirators together just when there are so many variables working to pit groups against each other?
It's an excellent question. And I think that's sort of the kind of great scam that was sort of pulled off on the American people, was pitting poor people of different colors against each other and getting them to think that racial privilege is a currency that is of greater value than economic opportunity, right? And, you know, W.B. Du Bois talks about that, of giving, of the white planter class saying to the white lower classes, we'll give you something else. We're never going to give you economic opportunity. We're always going to keep that for ourselves. But to ensure that you never vote away our economic superiority over you, and you never vote to tax us to help yourselves, we'll give you this other thing. So that if you are at the lowest rung of the economy, you can still come in the front of the theater, while that black doctor at the highest end of black society has to sit in the balcony and come in the back. And that thing is valuable, and that you should keep voting based on that. Like, don't ever combine with those people. And now you're starting to see that same thing with immigrants versus people who were born here. Well, you know, you're an American, you deserve what you're getting. They're stealing.
Yes.
They just want to come here so they can take welfare. That's why they're here. You shouldn't ever combine with them. They're bad people. And I think you're starting to see that constant division, but it just so happens that it's always people who are not at the elite level economically, right? That are always being sort of put into this Hunger Games against each other. We, I think, who are people of color, who are marginalized communities, white Americans who are marginalized economically, have to somehow get out of the Hunger Games and get ourselves out, right? But I think there are somebody asked about allies. There are some allies that you wouldn't expect.
Yep.
A lot of people in the business world hate this debate because they have so many immigrant employees that they depend on that they couldn't really do their businesses without, right? I mean, no immigrants, no Apple. Steve Jobs, immigrant, right?
Syrian, yep.
Syrian, right? So I think that you finding allies sort of outside of the box that we're all in, but also not letting ourselves get brainwashed into thinking that the people who are our potential allies are the enemy. This debate of TPS versus DACA breaks my heart because I see it already happening, that everyone is being asked to scramble for the one good thing, which is the break. Who gets it? Is it the visa lottery people, the TPS people, the DACA people? And all three of you ain't gonna get it. If they all combine together, and black civil rights groups and people like, you know, we both know the Reverend Dr. William Barber who's fighting
amazing.
the Poor People's Campaign, was such a transracial moral movement.
If you don't know much about it, I would
Google
really,
him.
to me, it's probably one of the most optimistic things happening in America.
Totally.
Is what Reverend Barber is leading.
Absolutely, because he's saying it's not about black or white or wherever you're from. It's about right and wrong.
I have to tell you, I get really nervous with the Asian community on this. There are some exceptions, right? The Asian Advancing Justice, Asian Law Center. I have a lot of Asian lawyers who have advised me. I have a lot of lawyers. But in general, you know, 72% of all Asian adults in America are immigrants. Asian adults are more immigrants than Latinos are immigrants, right? And yet, for the most part, in general, where has the Asian community been in this conversation? And how do we make sure that Asian people don't get used as, oh, you know, why can't you be like them, right? Why can't you just, so for me, I've had some really uncomfortable conversations with quote unquote leaders. I always get nervous when people call themselves leaders in DC. With some leaders of Latino organizations that I will not name because I'm polite, who have said to them privately on phone calls, you cannot do any more undocumented events and not have undocumented Asian and undocumented black people included, right? I will be the first person to publicly criticize you, right? Because inclusion really means inclusion, right? But guess what? Like some of the conversations, by the way, we have a film festival every year, the Defiant American Film Festival. We're having it in Chicago in April, the 20th to the 22nd. So if you can check it out, people know Chicago, tell them. But I was talking to, there's a huge undocumented and immigrant rights group organizing in Chicago, right? One of the hubs, really. And they were talking about what can we do to criticize President Obama and the fact that he deported 3 million people, really, right? Because this has been a bipartisan mess. And my reaction as somebody who's done a lot of reporting in Chicago when I was at the Washington Post was, what work has happened between the black community in Chicago and the immigrant community in Chicago? Of course, not all black people are supportive of President Obama, but you're not going to ask black people to come to criticize Barack Obama and they turn around and ask you, what have you done for black people? Right? That's a thorny conversation. It is. And I just think those are the questions now to be asked. Yeah. And as an Asian person, I just think silence in this issue has been complicity.
Well, and especially since, if you go back and, there was a radio conversation that Steve Bannon, when he was still hosting his Breitbart radio show, had with Donald Trump, who was just then citizen Donald Trump. And he comes on and they're talking about immigration, and Bannon is laying down the nationalist law. We got to get rid of all these people, America first, we got to get rid of them. And Trump sort of innocently says, but we want to keep the Asians in Silicon Valley, right? Like, we like them, right? I mean, we need them. And, Bannon says, no, too many Asians. Too many. They got to go too.
The food is so good. Just kidding.
Hi. Thanks so much for coming and talking to us about this. I'm a staff member at the college here at Harvard. I'm a secretary. I'm in a union. That would have been probably a total impossibility for my generation in this period of time if the unions weren't coming back because of immigrant worker leadership. So that's just really important. The numbers of undocumented people are about to go up a lot because of TPS, if what's planned goes through. And so I was interested in what you were saying about, it's a good opportunity for people who aren't immigrants to see what they can thank immigrants for and the immigrant community for. Our union, our unions on campus, there are 3 or 4 unions on campus, all the strongest activists, and definitely the strongest public speakers, because that's not me. They've been really targeted unfairly by this. And honestly, also at Harvard, 70 of those workers got together and wrote a letter asking Drew Faust to speak up about this, to advocate with Congress and with the Senate and the President to say that Harvard supports these workers and supports these students. I haven't heard anything yet. It was just last Wednesday, so that may be still on the way. But I was kind of interested in what you were saying about these big organizations, how do we get them? Because as far as, we can tell that isn't in their interest either to have all of these workers disappear. But that also seemed that's a way to build the solidarity that should be happening. But we're kind of confused about that, who benefits from this, because it's not Harvard, it's not Apple, as you were saying. So that's basically my comment.
It's kind of a fraught conversation, because you also have this sort of nativist world kind of trying to get to unions to say that immigration is hurting your workers, right? And trying to pit union workers against immigrants as if there's a zero-sum game of work itself. But I mean, having lived in Florida, I can tell you the SEIU union, which has, that represents nurses, is heavily Caribbean. This is also a conversation in between groups of black people, because there are Caribbean black people who have undocumented people in their families. They're not really saying much either, because they're, sort of out of the conversation as well. And so you're going to have some conversations with the Caribbean community, who are also afraid, right? But who are also heavily unionized. So I think one of the things is that we've got to start having these conversations, particularly with the union movement, to explain that this is not a zero-sum game about work. That undocumented people, that immigrants are not stealing work from American workers, that is actually just a fiction. It's not true. If you deport you know, a teacher from California, that doesn't mean that a steel worker from Kentucky is going to get on a plane, move to California, and become that teacher. These two have nothing to do with each other. But that sort of, I mean, I remember I've interviewed, you know, some Trump supporters who think that that's true, that they will get their job back if you deport a chemistry teacher in a state 1,000 miles away. It doesn't make any sense. So I think we have to start having some conversations, and the union movement already has the infrastructure. They've got money, they've got infrastructure, they should really be leading. I haven't heard a lot from them. I haven't seen
Not in this cycle, in this cycle, no.
So
we're running out of time. I'm sure there's plenty more to talk about. But I want to thank Jose and thanks Joy for being with us tonight. Really important and stimulating conversation, giving us a lot to think about. So I've got two announcements before we leave. One, a reminder of the third Askwith Forum this week, Thursday night at 4:30, for the screening of Teach Us All, followed by a panel conversation with members of the Little Rock Nine. This is something that you don't want to miss. And then the DACA seminar continues tomorrow. So tomorrow at noon, we'll have a brown bag lunch in Robinson Hall and a discussion with undocumented students at Harvard. So that you definitely don't want to miss. Through the seminar, so the seminar is chock-packed full of events like this one. And so if you want to know more, you can find out more at dacaseminar.fas.harvard.edu. In the next several weeks, we'll have visitors. Julio Salgado will be with us, Ju Hong, Erica Andiola, Cornell West, Angela Davis, the East LA rock band Quetzal, Esperanza Spalding, and on and on and on and on.
Wow.
I also want to say that this seminar very intentionally, in the spirit of One Harvard, right, it will not be housed exclusively at HGSE, but rather that we wanted to extend this conversation across the university. So we'll have events across the yard, at the Divinity School, at the Law School, Kennedy School, and on and on and on. So please, again, dacaseminar.fas.harvard.edu. Thank you so much for joining us, and we look forward to seeing you soon. Thank you.
And before we go, can I just say one more thing? And I have to say this to my friend Jose. You know, there was a time when your visibility was sort of a shield for you, but you take incredible risks, and I think you are the bravest person that I know. So I just want to thank you for standing up for immigrants. As an immigrant child, we're all immigrants. Thank you for what you do. You're a very brave young man. I appreciate you.
Not young anymore,
and I adore you. But you're still young. Always claim it. Thank you all for coming.
Thank you.